Thanks, Adrian, and thanks very much for the invitation, and great to see so many familiar faces and large companies represented, so excellent. As Adrian mentioned, I look after, with a couple of my colleagues here, the off-grid mining sector at ARENA, and our role is very much to work with you as developers and stakeholders to get projects away that push the boundaries in terms of renewable energy. So I just thought I'd start with a couple of facts and figures, so understanding how big the actual mining resources sector is in Australia. The sector accounts for roughly 10% of Australia's total energy use, and its energy is mainly supplied, as we've heard, diesel, circa 40%, natural gas, circa 30%, and then grid electricity, the remainder. To date, ARENA's invested about $30 million in this sector, and I'll touch on a few of the projects, and we've heard from the Sunshift guys already, as to where that investment is and where it's going. But I will also talk a bit about ARENA for those who aren't familiar with us and what we do, some historical context, and then also our current projects and what we're looking at to do in this space. So for those who aren't familiar, and I'll just quickly fly through the intro to who we are. ARENA was established in 2012 with two primary objectives: one, to improve the competitiveness of renewable energy technologies, and two, to increase the supply of renewable energy in Australia. The time frame for us doing this is out to 2022, with the solutions sort of longer dated than that, out to 2030 and 2040. ARENA operates, or attempts to operate, very much as a commercially minded organisation, as any other investor in the sector would, with the main difference being our return on investment isn't necessarily monetary, but more around knowledge sharing and development of the sector. And that knowledge sharing objective is really around addressing real and perceived barriers to future investment, and accelerating the commercialisation of these technologies. At present, ARENA has in the region of about $500 million to commit out to the period 2022. Our investment priorities at the moment, and I'll cover this off in detail later on, but is very relevant to this sector, and four current areas that we have priorities where we're focusing. The first one is secure and reliable networks and grids, which again is closely aligned, for example, with the commentary from the Finkel review around stabilising the grid for higher renewable energy penetration levels. The second one, solar PV R&D, and again, building on the great work that Australia's done in that space to date. The third one, energy productivity, and the fourth one, again relevant here, the exporting of Australia's renewable energy competitive advantage. So just a quick look historically. So this graph here shows a simple plot of the cost of PV, non-residential PV deployments, which picks up commercial, industrial, and I suppose mining deployment, and to the end there, the ARENA supported projects. Our main work early on in this space was done in 2013 and 2014 with a program called the Regional Australian Renewables Initiative. And this was developed to build a portfolio of energy solutions, including hybrid solutions, fringe of grid, remote energy solutions. And it was really to build, to break down roadblocks that existed in the sector, and encourage the take-up. And from this, it was identified there were a number of risks in the sector that still prevailed. So I'll quickly just go through a few of the projects, and a number of these have been mentioned, so I hope, fingers crossed, all my figures reconcile to those that have been mentioned already. But the first one being the Degreaser solar project, which integrated 10 megawatts or so of solar PV with battery storage and the existing diesel plant. ARENA provided $20 million to that $41 million project, and was really the key thing here was the integration of those various technologies to understand how they worked and to provide that necessary grid stability. As mentioned, solar provides now a majority of the facility's daytime electricity requirements, offsetting in the region of 20% of diesel consumption or 5 million litres. It was definitely viewed as a landmark project in terms of integrating technologies, and referenced in terms of the great participation we had from industry when we actually physically took a site tour out there. So again, an example of that knowledge sharing work we've done. So the next project, and again mentioned with EDL, is the Weipa Solar Farm with Rio Tinto up in Weipa. And again, this was a demonstration of high penetration PV in that remote operations. ARENA provided $3.5 million for the $23 million project, and it was part of the efforts to, in terms of shift, I'll get to that one, and part of the efforts to increase the security of suppliers for remote networks. And as mentioned, it was a precursor to what will hopefully be a larger renewable penetration network. Next one, SunShift, and again, obviously quite relevant to the previous discussion. ARENA provided $22.1 million to develop the first megawatt scale redeployable hybrid solar for both off-grid and fringe of grid connections. A $4.2 million project with Laing O'Rourke and SunShift. And the main reason this was of key interest to ARENA was, again, that perceived barrier around mine life risk versus asset life, a common issue that prevails from an energy point of view for remote mines. And again, this we see as one of the key solutions to breaking down one of those barriers. The Kubapidi project, again, mentioned previously. Previously, that town relied quite heavily on diesel generation as its primary source of energy. This project was an exciting step forward in terms of the integration of a number of hybrid technologies, being high levels of wind, solar, and enabling technologies to integrate with the diesel facility. ARENA provided $18 million into the project, which again is being run by EDL. And it's that unique combination of those varying technologies as well as storage that made this project quite exciting. And I'll test these figures here and hopefully I've got them right. But from July 17 to February 18, the project operated for more than 1,300 hours on 100% renewables, with the longest interrupted supply period of 100% renewables lasting 42 hours. So again, an exciting precursor to further deployments of multi-technology solutions. So I suppose from that portfolio, and again touching on our knowledge sharing mandate, what have we learnt from this? And again, these themes have come out as part of our knowledge sharing process to date, and obviously will continue to. But firstly was impacts on project costs are project size and project location. The costs, if you on a per unit basis across the portfolio, varied materially. With naturally, as you expect, the high renewable energy fraction levels resulting in higher upfront costs, and likewise more remote deployments attracting higher upfront capital costs as well. But equally, those projects, notionally looking at higher renewable energy fraction. So again, a compounded effect there. And in general, the more technologies are needed to achieve those higher renewable energy fraction levels, so therefore requiring further upfront capital costs to offset hopefully what would be a lower ongoing OPEX compared to incumbent technologies. The second one is timing, and as you'd expect, these projects being fairly new in terms of the integration of these technologies were absolutely quite complex. But in terms of the delays of these projects that we observed, not necessarily compared to across our whole ARENA portfolio, was less so than that observed for our larger grid-connected solar PV. So again, I think the dedication of resources, the ability to capture those stakeholders really made a difference. And then I suppose the next point that sometimes gets overlooked is the stakeholder impact. So the importance of stakeholder engagement and consultation. In remote areas, your group of stakeholders are fairly locked in. It's not like you can move that facility elsewhere. So having stakeholder buy-in from everything from community to local on-the-ground engineers and operators through to board level was absolutely critical. So extremely important. And I suppose a quick couple of bullet points on what are some of those messages and take home for people thinking about projects in this space to date. The first one is firming up assumptions. So we've seen the importance of measuring both your wind and solar resource assessment and load profile data to understand what the optimal solution is. Again, that's critical and a necessary precursor to defining what would be an optimal project. Commercial models, there is no one-size-fits-all model, and I think of all the approaches, including the projects we've supported to date, there have been varying differences between those, and it is exploring the various options and ensuring that the most appropriate one is adopted. And lastly, looking for, seek all sorts of information for projects in this space. There are people who have done this or are thinking about it and have probably travelled down the paths that people are thinking about at the moment. So now changes that we're seeing in industry, and obviously there's a lot of first movers, and a number of their people are here in the room, and one of the common things we typically say is they should be the first port of call. So I'd encourage you absolutely to speak to people with projects in this space, to speak to them, interact with them, who they work with to deliver their projects. But there is, I suppose, compelling information that the price of renewables, the cost of renewables is decreasing and is constantly decreasing, and may not always be the right solution at this point in time, but definitely warrants that relevant consideration, particularly when you consider some of the headline prices about LCOE of diesel versus solar and wind. But what I was going to quickly touch on was maybe some of the barriers that we're seeing, and what are the solutions to these, or what are the ways that people are thinking about them. The first one being mine life and asset risk, and I think that's a very critical one, particularly in the solar, in the off-grid space, where your asset life for in-the-ground assets usually exceeds that of the proven mine life. So things like the sun shift solution, where that is relevant, is absolutely relevant in this case. The second one is challenging the status quo. We typically find when speaking to people in the sector that the incumbent position is sort of the default, and it is getting people to think outside that square, and speaking to people, observing projects, going to see them, makes a huge difference to understanding how they work. Thirdly, the level of investment required. I don't think we'd ever want to underestimate the work that's required in terms of developing a project of the nature that we've spoken about. It is material. There is a whole lot of investment required up front to define things around, resource assessment, energy solutions, commercial models and the like. But it is a big step. And lastly, and I think a barrier that is being broken down is around the perception around renewables. So I think going back some time when I first started working in this space at ARENA, it wasn't sort of the first port of call. It was generally perceived to be a risky area, but I think we're finding now with a number of deployments in this space that the general perception of renewables being a risky technology is starting to decrease. Things around integration of renewables into existing generators is being proven. So again, it is about understanding and educating people as to what these solutions are. So what are we seeing in terms of inquiries to ARENA at the moment? We're seeing a lot more interest in higher renewable energy fraction options for off-grid applications, exploring options regarding different generation configurations, exploring required levels of storage for projects, the need to prove up resources, and new commercial models. The graph here is just a conceptual one that we've pulled together based on some of the information that we've seen, plots the LCOE of renewable energy in the mining sector. The lines present different forecast cost scenarios, and you can see there it's sort of now 5 years, 10 years and 20 years. And these are plotted then over different penetration levels. You can see there's 0, 50, 75 and 100. And a key thing to this sensitivity, which again we purposely haven't put any numbers on there, is the relevant cost of the incumbent thermal generator that is being displaced. But I think that the takeaway from this analysis is that the cost trajectory is down. It is definitely worth thinking about, and as you look towards higher fraction levels, that the cost position is becoming much more attractive. Just a thing to touch on in terms of extension of the renewable energy fraction levels, and again we're seeing more and more interest in higher fraction level projects, which obviously brings in the importance of wind generation and storage. We've typically seen for the projects that we've been approached with the work done to date that there is typically a complementary pattern in terms of solar and wind, and again that's probably a bit of an extreme example there, but it definitely is trending that way. But I equally, talking about the supply side, I think is an absolutely relevant and common point, but aligning with our energy productivity portfolio, we are putting equal amount of time and effort and seeing a number of inquiries, particularly on the demand side. So again, demand side opportunities in terms of moving load to match generation, and as the earlier panel mentioned, the electrification of mining equipment infrastructure is obviously the next frontier, I think, that's coming once the de-risking of the supply side starts to happen. This is just a brief snapshot of some of the risks that we are seeing for projects that we're speaking to at the moment. This table summarises, again, picking up on sort of the key risk assessments for the projects that we're looking at under our investment program at the moment. I think would be fairly obvious to the people in the room, but nonetheless worthwhile spelling out. It picks up the mine life risk, the certificate risk in terms of what the pricing looks like for that. Resource performance is a material one. The integration risk and the supply uncertainty of the power, which again is probably the most prominent point there, and has been heavily emphasised today. And this probably leads well into what we're doing and what we're looking to do in this space into the future. So what comes next for ARENA? So ARENA at the moment has one investment program open called the Advancing Renewables program, which is available on our website, and encourage anyone with an interest in ARENA, what we're doing, or potentially for funding to have a look at that guideline. It is a fairly easy to read document that governs how we make investments, how we interact with you, the assessment process and the like. There's a number of eligibility and merit criteria that we look at, but again, feel free to approach any member of the ARENA staff at our desk outside, and we're happy to give you that context. But in summary, what is ARENA looking to do in this space? It is very much to build on that existing portfolio. It is to continue to lift that high watermark to de-risk projects and initiatives that would encourage further industry participation. I think the South 32 is a great example where ARENA, I think, is quite happily to say we're not involved in that project. It is that original de-risking of technology and energy solutions that allows that to perpetuate is actually a fantastic story from us. So it is very pleasing to hear the progress on that project. But as I mentioned, where we're also keen to get exposure from our portfolio point of view is the electrification of equipment that would currently be typically diesel powered. Again, is that hauling, refrigeration, etc. New forms of energy storage, and again, the panel this morning mentioned hydrogen as a energy storage mechanism, and that's something again that we're doing a lot of early stage work in that is progressing quite well. The demand management side again is somewhere where we see there's a role to play and some advancements to make. And lastly, and probably harping on a bit, is the increasing renewable energy fraction levels that we'd like to see the industry continue to progress on. Just recently, and there's a number of hard copies outside, ARENA recently released the Hybrid Power Generation for Australian Off-Grid Mines Handbook. Again, a very succinct, easy to read document which is designed to address both real and perceived barriers faced by the sector, looking for new power opportunities for their operations. This has brought together a number of stakeholders in the sector to contribute to this. It has a lot of input, a lot of references to existing projects, challenges they face. So if this is an area of interest, I'd very much encourage you to grab a copy of that and ask any questions you might have. Just to pick up a couple of topics that the handbook looks at, a basic introduction to hybrid solutions and what they mean and what they offer, the integration issues and considerations that need to be thought of, commercial structure options as well. So again, with the IPP model and variants thereof is absolutely relevant. A number of case studies are in there also in terms of projects of different avenues they've taken from renewable and storage opportunities. But I suppose just concluding on that, this is the example of ARENA fulfilling its mandate around knowledge sharing. It is getting practical information together to disseminate to industry, to hopefully educate them to develop projects of similar nature and beyond. And this guidebook is very much designed to be a living document that will continue to be updated. We'll hold workshops on it to help people understand and ask questions on it. So again, if this is an area of interest, I'd very, very much encourage you to go and pick up a copy and ask any questions you might have. So lastly, I just want to touch on a piece of work that we're doing at the moment and ties in with our investment priority around exporting renewable energy, which is really the argument that Australia has a market-leading or a world-leading renewable energy resource, and how can that be leveraged or exported? And I think the easy example is to say the production of renewable hydrogen for export to Japan or other Asian countries for consumption for power or vehicles. But thinking beyond that, there is the ability to, if you like, embed that renewable energy competitive advantage into minerals. So is it the upgrading and processing of minerals here in Australia rather than overseas, leveraging that resource, as looking back historically has been the case, for example, in Canada and to a degree Tasmania from a hydro perspective. But again, this is a report that we've commissioned to look at the opportunities, to outline where they might be, what are the barriers, and again set a path forward to hopefully take a forward step in the minerals processing sector to add value to the Australian economy. So again, that's all I wanted to cover off, but I thank you very much for taking the time to listen. Thank you.